Welcome to Nugget 108 with Steve Groman, and today the question is, are you willing to compromise Genesis with the evolutionary geologist?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Well, I think they got just about everything wrong. I like geology. Geology is good stuff, studying the science of studying the rocks. Merriam-Webster, geology, a science that deals with the history of the earth and its life, especially as recorded in the rocks, a study of the solid matter of the celestial bodies, such as the moon. Well, that's an interesting thing because dealing with the history of the earth, that is what geology does, but that's evolutionary geology.
Right, that's their intentions. And I like studying geologic features, especially those in Arizona.
Absolutely, that's beautiful stuff.
We refer you back to Lesson 8, Darwin's Legacy, because Darwin was influenced by a man named Charles Lyell. But we give evidence in Lesson 4, After the Flood, and in Rock Solid Proof of the biblical answers to geology, as opposed to that which is primarily proposed in earth science and geology textbooks in high school and in college.
A point we need to make is everybody has the same evidence. The rock layers are the layers. I mean, we drive down the road. We have to cut the hillside down to put the road a little more level. We can see the layers. You go to the Grand Canyon, you can see the layers. Many, many places across this earth. The issue is the layers are there, but it's the interpretation of how they got there and the time that is the difference. And of course, the Bible says it was 6 days, the heaven and earth, the sea, and all in Exodus 20, verse 11. Right in the middle of the Ten Commandments, God says he made everything in 6 days. That's the 6 days of creation, the climax of the creation of mankind. So there can be no periods of time for things to happen.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that because as we discuss in After the Flood and in Rock Solid Proof, we are looking at the exact same thing. And most times, evolutionists will say it takes wind, it takes water, it takes heat, it takes those kinds of elements to create what they're looking at. And we know that that is what created what they're looking at. We just have a different time frame and a different event, and we have the mechanism, as you say, over and over again.
Yes, the Bible was written thousands of years ago by people that were never in North America. But what they say happened over the whole earth is evident even here, which is very strong evidence. Go back to what you just said. They know it takes wind and water, but they'll talk about a shallow sea, an inland ocean, a shallow ocean, some kind of thing like that with no mechanism how it got there or where it went.
Psalm 104 says specifically, speaking of God, who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. The Lord put it here, He knows what He did, and He tells us what He did in the Bible, and most of the things we see today are evidence of a worldwide flood.
It says, thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment, the water stood above the mountains, talking about the flood time. At thy rebuke they fled, at the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. God had something to say, this stuff races off. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys, unto the place which thou hast founded for them. That's the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down. And He set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. And He sends the springs in the valleys which run among the hills. He gives us a beautiful overview of the flood here, the original creation, the flood time frame, the actual flood mechanism, and that He set a boundary when the mountains rose and the valleys sank down. That is when a lot of the twisted strata layers that we see would have been formed.
As we mentioned, Sir Charles Lyell, he lived at the bulk of the whole 19th century. He is best known as the author of The Principles of Geology, which presented uniformitarianism, the idea that the earth was shaped by the same scientific processes still in operation today to the broad general public. And that's one of the points that we want to make, is that many of these scientists had kept a lot of this information among themselves, and they didn't know really how to present it to the common man. Principles of Geology started that course. And Lyell saw himself as the spiritual savior of geology, freeing the science from the old dispensation of Moses. And we know what that means. Moses, Genesis, Noah's flood, and God. But what's interesting about Lyell, it says, he struggled to square his religious beliefs with evolution. He had particular difficulty in believing in natural selection as the main motive force in evolution. Although he did struggle, what he did put forth did free many from Moses, and sadly has become the dominant study of geology today.
Yes, absolutely it has. These are the kind of statements that I warn people about all the time because, people want to combine a little bit of creation, a little bit of evolution, or believe some sort of evolutionary idea, even if they don't claim it is that. It's their idea. And they'll just say that God did it that way. And that's what Lyell was trying to go with. He's trying to figure out, okay, if this is true and this is true, how can I square this up? Something's going to have to give. And it's almost always the Bible that ends up being watered down instead of realizing that the science is not true. And that's the danger with our children even still today. That's why I stress that so strongly. Pay attention to what's going on with them.
And then this little bit, how it affected Darwin. Lyell's interpretation of geological change as the steady accumulation of minute changes over enormously long spans of time was a powerful influence on the young Charles Darwin. Lyell asked Robert Fitzroy, captain of the HMS Beagle, to search for erratic boulders on the survey voyage of the Beagle. And just before it set out, Fitzroy gave Darwin Volume 1 of the first edition of Lyell's Principles. When the Beagle made its first stop ashore at St. Jago in the Cape Verde Islands, Darwin found rock formations which, seen through Lyell's eyes, gave him a revolutionary insight into the geological history of the island, an insight he applied throughout his travels.
Yes, and that's the kind of thing also I warn people all the time. When our young ones especially, they get these new thoughts that never should have been in their thought process in the first place because it was in their textbook. Now, all of a sudden they build a new filter that they run everything through. They're seeing everything through somebody else's eyes, through somebody else's filter that they just put onto our children. People grow up, learn a little bit more, and they end up believing a lot of this stuff.
I know that most people think of Darwin and the Beagle, and we think of the finches or the Galapagos tortoises, but it was actually geology that put the first hold on his mind, and Lyell's interpretation of geology that started his road to being the father of evolution in some form.
Correct.
And here's a man that is kind of interesting that many people don't know about. His name is Josiah Whitney. He was an American geologist. He was a professor of geology at Harvard, and he was the chief of the California Geological Survey. Mount Whitney is the highest point in the continental United States, and the Whitney Glacier, the first confirmed glacier in the United States on Mount Shasta, were both named after him by members of the survey. And I want to point out about Whitney in that he was a lot like Lyell. He was religious, but yet evolutionary. And because he was at Harvard, and I want you to note the times, it was in the time of origin of the species, and this affected his mindset. What I find interesting about him was that while in California, Whitney became embroiled in two notable controversies. First, Whitney maintained that Yosemite Valley was created by a cataclysmic sinking of the valley floor, which would tie in with the Bible.
Exactly.
However, John Muir, who was exploring the Yosemite area during the same time, argued that the valley was carved by glacial action, which that could be obviously flood action too. But Whitney derided Muir as an ignoramus and a mere sheep herder. Whitney's survey report suppressed evidence of glaciers, and he never abandoned his viewpoint. Most scientists eventually dismissed Whitney's hypothesis and accepted Muir's. Again, these men were in this time frame, just like John Powell, when they are going out west and they're seeing all these things, they are being so influenced by Lyell and how evolutionary theory was coming on the scene.
Most people are not familiar with Whitney, but most people are, or a lot of people are familiar with the name John Muir.
The second controversy, which is kind of interesting, is that the second controversy involved the discovery of the Calvera skull, allegedly uncovered by a miner 130 feet beneath the surface of the earth. Eventually, the skull made its way into the possession of Whitney, who quickly pronounced it genuine and concluded that it came from the Pliocene era, 5.3 million years ago to 1.8 million years ago. Others assert that the skull is much younger, as little as 1,000 years. Here we go.
Amazing?
We've got young, old, but yet we still have Whitney.
It's the same skull.
He's in conflict with himself, and that when he sees a cataclysmic event, yet he sees a skull and he's putting it millions of years ago. It's just interesting to see how these men were at the pivotal time in their life. Evolution eventually won out.
Yes. And the controversy, that's the same controversy, the same principle that takes place with our young ones as they go through school these days.
They're holding on to what they've been taught as a young person or what they know in their heart, but then evolution can get a hold on them when it gets into their thinking.
Because they present it as a fact, they present it as they have evidence, they present it as though that they know these things. They're beliefs, but they're presented as knowledge.
And here's a beautiful picture of Mount Whitney. We enjoy going to the Lone Pine area, and we did many nuggets on all the flood evidence up and down U.S. Highway 395 in eastern California, and I recommend you go back and look at those nuggets. Mount Whitney is the tallest point
in the continental United States.
And it's at 14,494 feet. And here are pictures of Mount Shasta and the glaciers they're on. And
we've
Mount
been to all
Shasta
these places. They're beautiful.
It's beautiful. We hiked all around there. Fabulous, fabulous.
Like Genesis 7:11 says, I know I say it over and over, but in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, very specific, God is here, the same day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven opened. Cataclysm took place. It's not a good idea to compromise with any of the evolutionary ideas in the first place. But I'm never going to compromise Genesis with evolutionary geologists because they change their mind all the time. The Bible's forever settled in heaven.
That certainly doesn't mean you can't enjoy these beautiful places.
Absolutely. Go enjoy them.
Thank you.